man. I still love the fact that that is a thing that we can do. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Next to the Floor podcast. My name is Harrison. I am your host with the most. I am joined today by the one, the only, Drew Sutherland. Whooshoom. There he is. Oh my gosh. Hello, Drew. Welcome to the show.
Super excited to be here, and thanks for asking me to be on it.
No problem. I'm still blown away by the fact that we can do a little countdown. That's so fun. Hello, welcome. If this is your first time watching the podcast, welcome to this crazy experience. We do this bi-weekly. We talk about all things Black Lives Matter related, dance related, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Drew was kind of on, well, it wasn't an official podcast episode, but it was kind of like a practice Zoom call sort of thing that spawned this whole entire adventure. So I'm wicked excited to have you here. How have you been? How's life out in Chicago?
Chicago's good. Chicago's sunny. Nothing's on fire. Nothing's falling into the middle of the planet. So it's pretty good. Except for, context, RIP, rest in power, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But outside of that, it's been pretty good for me.
That is good. I'm glad to hear that. Things, fortunately, in Boston have stayed fairly calm, cool, collected. I don't know. It's hard as a dance instructor. I find that when I'm not at the studio, I'm literally just here kind of like shut it in my house, or I'm at the gym, which is kind of like my home away from home. And I love that, but I don't really see a whole lot happening in the outside world aside from what I see on Facebook or on HuffPo or on my Twitter feed. So I'm glad things are staying relatively cool, calm, collected for you.
Yeah, it's I'm thankfully I've made the decision a while back never to get on to Twitter officially. Like, I follow enough accounts on social media where I can kind of like see the things I want to see if I search it out. But if I actually got on Twitter, like, I don't know if I could. There wouldn't be much left of me. Yeah,
I think every day regret the decision that I got on Twitter. I started a Twitter account maybe 10 years ago when way back, never used it. I think it was kind of the same time that I started my Tumblr account.
Okay.
Because everybody had a Tumblr. And just never used my Twitter. And then all of a sudden, quarantine happens and I'm like, all right, now's the time. Now is the time to become a Twitter bot.
Yeah, that corner of the internet I'm just kind of sticking out of. I actually have a list on my phone of the people or accounts I would follow to tailor my experience to independent journalists and activists and things like that. But it's just I can't jump into it because I just know there's just enough there to just eat my soul alive. And I just I'd rather not. I get a lot of information from a lot of sources, but I don't know if I can jump on that one yet.
It is definitely a rabbit hole that you have to willingly just kind of dive into and know that that's where you're going to exist for a very long time.
Well, after this podcast, when I get famous, then I obviously have to get on so I can get a blue check and then my brand will have to expand, or I'm just dropping words that I think I've heard before. So.
You hear that, Twitter? Verify Drew as soon as he starts his Twitter account. I don't know if you're going to get famous from this podcast per se. I'm putting positive vibes into the universe for you, obviously. I have not yet got Twitter verified, but stay tuned. It's coming your way right down the pipeline. Speaking of, getting famous and things along those lines, this is a segue that's terrible because I'm really great at them. And completely apropos of nothing. We're sponsored this week, but not really. So peep this. So last podcast, I had featured a company that I'm very familiar with. it's a company. He's a designer. His name is London. He owns a business called London Customs. It is a, kind of like a, oh, there you go. Ooh, look at that. Thanks, Gary. London Customs. It's a design and clothing store sort of deal. There's London in that bottom left of that picture. He was one of my campers way back when I was a camp counselor before I even got into ballroom dancing. Yeah, he was on my camp counselor a lifetime ago. And he started his own business. And I was talking to him the other day, and I was like, "Hey, I'm going to feature you on my podcast, and then I'm just going to say that you're my sponsor." And just like promote all of your stuff and have people buy your things. So what we're doing today, if those of you watching at home, if you like the Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, do all the social stuff, leave a comment below. I'm going to pick one of you lucky viewers to, win some merchandise from onelondoncustoms.com. So, do that. Ooh, there's his logo. Largely inspired by Basquiat, who's one of the premier French, I want to say, what is he, a modernist painter? Contemporary. He's a very contemporary painter. Really, really cool. But yeah, check out his website. The link will be below this video, onelondoncustoms.com. And thank you again, London, for, just being you. And hashtag not sponsored, but in our heart, we are sponsored. But, okay, so here's a really good segue. Speaking of Basquiat, who is a French painter, we are talking the ever controversial for literally, I can see why, there's reasons, controversial yet incredibly amazing Sundance Film Festival award-winning movie, Mignonne, or Cuties, as it is known in the English-speaking world, which was released earlier this year in 2020 and received all sort of critical acclaim. Was hailed as one of the best coming of age movies in the last 10 years. And then Netflix got a hold of it and, for lack of better words, effed it up. So
yeah, they kind of ished the bed on that one. I think
really did.
Yeah, I think that, to kind of catch people up on it from, at least my experience of it. My experience of it was I got introduced to the concept or the movie itself and just, all the buzz and controversy about it when I saw a couple posts about side-by-side comparison of the French poster, which was up, and then the Netflix marketing of it. And the Netflix marketing of it was just really didn't look like, for me, it was like it had done by somebody who had no context for what the movie was actually about and what topics it covered and the themes underneath inside of it. So it just seemed like, what's the flashiest thing that'll definitely get a lot of people's attention? And Netflix definitely did that. They got a lot of people's attention, and they did it in a really bad way by sensationalizing the fact that these are, the actresses in it are portraying, 11, 12-year-old girls doing things that, dancing in ways that most people would find very objectionable, and to sensationalize that as opposed to, have it be a coming-of-age story like you talked about, Harrison, mm-hmm. is pretty irresponsible for a giant company, and they definitely got some backlash from it.
Oh, 100%. And, after having watched the movie, I look at I posted something the other day on my Facebook and also on my Twitter. Follow me at HRRSNWRIGHT. That's my Twitter handle. It's just my name and last name, no vowels. I posted, the never ending supply of memes that are there, about, Cuties comes out, which is a very, very, very clear commentary on I'm going to say that like the sexualization of of adolescent girls, in particular of like girls of color. And there's some very incredibly like beautiful moments in the movie that show this 100%. We'll talk about that later. But there was a lot of backlash towards this movie, yet we've had shows like, Toddlers and Tiaras. We've had Dance Moms on for 10, 12 years at this point. And they're like the very same people who are calling for, Netflix and, Mimona Ducre to be like basically burned at the stake, that are calling for that, are the same people that were like completely hush hush on like all of these other shows that are effectively the same exact thing, exploiting children for profit, in even in a worse fashion. And the number of responses that I got on that were like, no, it's completely different. It's like there are two completely different separate things. Like, it blew my mind and made it so obvious that people have not seen this movie. Because if you watch the movie, and I want to say, like, from the beginning, if you watch this movie, the dancing in it, when there is dancing, so I'll start by saying there's very little dancing in this movie. Like, the dancing is literally like third or fourth to the actual plot. When there is dancing, it's actually very good. And there are a couple of moments where, like, they're doing what you would expect to see based on the posters, like on the Netflix poster, that happens for like 30 seconds at the very end of the movie, and it ends with the main character in tears.
Yeah. I mean, it's let's talk about the idea of like, I actually kind of slightly disagree with you when you talk about Dance Moms and Toddlers and Tiaras being the same thing. I actually think there's not as much self-awareness in those shows. Those shows are just exploitative, really.
Oh, 100%.
Right?
I'm going to walk back my statement and say that it's not, I'm not saying like Cuties and Toddlers and Tiaras and Dance Moms are the same thing, like intrinsically. Right. I think the outrage that we are experiencing for Cuties is misdirected when what people are calling for as like or why they are outraged for Cuties is the same things that they should be outraged for those other shows.
Yeah,
that's
I totally agree. I think a lot of it is, clickbait type things where it's this, and I read a headline, right? Most people read the headline, get outraged, and be like, well, that's it. That's the story, right? Mm-hmm. I happened to read the op-ed the director herself put out in the Washington Post, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce her name. It's not something I do really well, so I'm just going to stay out of that one. But it's a great perspective, and you have to think about this Senegalese French woman who, could basically have her whole career end before it starts because of poor marketing, reactionary people that don't actually watch the movie, or you don't even necessarily have to watch the movie, but you read a synopsis of it, right? Read a synopsis where it's like it's taking a look at somebody who, is trying to assimilate in a culture that's not all hers, working against, being a teenager or becoming a teenager in a conservative household, like conservative valued household, not necessarily like American conservative, but, a conservative religious household, and trying to kind of rebel against that as everyone does, and trying to find a group of friends and, making poor decisions because you're not even a teenager yet. Like, these are so many things that are 100% in the zeitgeist, 100% part of what a lot of film, coming of age films are. Mm-hmm. And yet it can be, missed so quickly just by a headline. Right. And it's so easily just to jump on the cancel culture train. And then it's like, well, Hollywood, pedophilia, da-da-da-da-da. And then suddenly it's like, well, I don't even want to get near that, as opposed to taking a nuanced look. I think that's something that's definitely missing in a lot of places, is a nuanced look at something and going, okay, this is a critique of something that is real, and that is something that is an issue, right? Like, yes, some of there isn't that much dancing, like you mentioned, and some of it is uncomfortable for when you know the characters are that young. When you know the characters are young, you're like, they probably shouldn't be doing that, right? And a lot of the two main girls, they both have households that are not as supportive, right? They're not learning about a different value system, and they don't have anything to counteract what they get out of social media, right? So it's a critique on what we put as a priority as adults in social media, right? What gets the most likes, what gets the most clicks, like those things should be talked about. Those things should be critiqued. And the effect on children can only be critiqued when you have children portrayed that way. And there's nothing. They had the equivalent to child services and therapists on site like throughout the entire filming. Like, it was responsibly done. And I think it is, if you are looking to see a story that is a little uncomfortable with some of the themes, because you're like, gosh, that's the world I'm living in right now. That's really, really tough, Yep. So I think it's worth the watch if you're able to kind of handle that idea that you're going to see some things that aren't necessarily the most comfortable, but it's not exploitative to children. It's not, child porn or pedophilia or anything like that. Like, it's very much, hey, these are things, and if it makes you uncomfortable, like, that should be something that you have to, come to terms with, and we should as a society as well. I was reminded of I think it was the Gus Van Sant movie Elephant.
I love that movie.
Right. And
so good.
If you haven't seen it, like, that was about school shootings, and that was really tough to watch, right? Like, I was in high school.
So masterfully done.
Yeah, and I was in high school, when Columbine first happened, and my school totally changed, and we went from tornado drills to active shooter drills. We put in metal detectors. We put in, a local security or police forces in high school. And that's something that it was a clear shift. And it's something that high school people have been dealing with ever since, in terrible, terrible ways in America. And, that was, this is how things like that happens. It was a fictional story, but still, it's like, that's not a comfortable thing to see. Right. And so those things, art is supposed to make you uncomfortable. Art is supposed to challenge you. And, is there some part of it where the main character being a dark-skinned girl from Africa, is that going to influence it versus if it was, a blonde-haired white girl from California? Like, there's got to be a little bit there, right? So,
I'm 100%. I think there's a lot to be said about the fact that there's so many different ways you can go with that idea. The main character, because the main character is a Black girl. I think the point that I noticed immediately is how she is portrayed so much younger than her peers, which is something that most Black children don't get the benefit of, especially in America, that Black children are often perceived as grown.
She's grown.
Even when they're children. Right. So the one thing that I keep having to remind people, especially of this movie, is that it is a foreign film. So I can understand, from an American standpoint and from the American viewpoint and ethics standpoint, why there was a lot of outrage and discomfort over, over the idea of having a movie based around the coming of age story is just not a very American topic. We don't like to talk about anything remotely involving, puberty or sexuality or anything along those lines. Anybody who does watch that movie has to be aware that it is a French movie, and the French are very, very open when it comes to matters of sexuality, just period. So that's the first thing. And you really have to go in and watch it, and just to to appreciate the storyline and how it's set up and built. I think the biggest thing that I noticed, and this was it was so clear and dead straight up in your face, like the sudden shift of the main character. Her name is Amy. Her full name is Aminata. But she, like, halfway through the movie, she's like a child through the entire first half, and it's phenom. And then she, you know, as an 11-year-old, she has her period for the first time. And the sudden shift of narrative in the second half to, like, her trying to understand what it means to now, like, be at the precipice of womanhood, as, you know, portrayed by not only her super religious family, who are all saying to her, literally, like, once it happens, oh, it's totally fine, welcome to womanhood. And then trying to understand what womanhood means as society at large. And when you're as an 11-year-old, when your only, like, source of information for that is what you see on social media, right? You're bound to end up in this kind of situation where you're a member of cuties and stealing your mom's money to buy costumes and stuff. But I will say, the first day she goes back to school with her hair done out, she killed the game. She walked into school the next day. I was like, Amy, you are killing it. She had her hair out, full afro.
Oh, she knew what she was doing. But
she knew what she was doing.
Well, and that's the interesting part about it, right? So you mentioned that, like, okay, now you've had your period and you've become a woman. It's something that you and I definitely have no experience in, having uncomfortable conversations. So let's just put that on the table. I'm not going to pretend I understand all of that. But they're also, you know, her great aunt or her grandma talked about, you know, okay, now it's time to learn what a woman does. And then it was immediately, okay, you're cooking. You're cooking
for your father's wedding, second marriage.
Yeah.
So much.
There was so many things they packed into that.
But, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's these traditional values and you know, more conservative religious viewpoints, and then you're fighting against that with a culture that is very much you know, not in line with that, and you're trying to, like all kids, trying to fit in, trying to find a group of friends, and then so you do things, and then once you receive that feedback, right, likes online or a friend group, then all of a sudden you're going to do more of that, and you're not developed. Like, your brain doesn't stop developing until it's like 25. So she had, like, in theory, another 14, 15, 16 years before her brain actually stopped developing, right? So she's going to make terrible choices, as we all did. Like, I'm lucky enough to be, you know, much closer to 40 than to 20. So I'm lucky enough where all of my dumb things weren't online. Like, the things that I did that were, you know, terrible, dumb, stupid, I can't believe I'm still alive after I jumped off that thing alive. So, you know, when you make poor choices, like kids will, there can be larger ramifications and larger consequences because we're living in such a connected world, which is great, but also it has that darker side. It's a double-edged sword to it. And so having those two ends of it and becoming, you know, what does it mean to become a woman when everybody is, you know, you've got preteens doing makeup tutorials that make tons of money and being exploited on YouTube, like, you know, what does that mean now versus what it meant 2 generations ago is wildly different. And if we don't address it, then we're letting the kids decide, and they're not capable of deciding what that should mean because they have no perspective. They don't know what it is going to look like 10 years from now or the consequences of their actions. And if you just say, oh, this movie's got little girls dancing provocatively, there's no message there, then you're missing so many great points of the movie.
And I also feel like the dancing, at least for the main character, Amy, like the provocative dancing, it's set up so clearly as kind of like a result of a lot of like emotional and childhood trauma, right? To see, like, as, you know, the only girl in her family with a younger brother and then an infant that she has to take care of while her mother's at work, to see her mother have to go through turmoil and deal with the fact that, you know, her husband is
remarrying.
Like, there's a lot of childhood trauma that leads to a lot of what Amy decides to do in this movie. So, like, you know, again, I'm going to say to all of our viewers and everybody, if you haven't watched it or like are so adamant in your beliefs that, like, you know, it's exploitative of children and blah, 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 like, you really need to give this movie a chance, because it is so much bigger than those like 3-4 minutes total within the entire movie where there is suggestive dancing. And when there is suggestive dancing, it's in short snippets, and it's done in a way that's like meant to make you uncomfortable and point out that it is like.
Actually, just thinking about it, I don't believe there's a point. I think there might be save for one moment where any of that uncomfortable moment happens where there isn't a character on screen also being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. They're most of the time the adults, but also there were moments where the kids were like, I'm not comfortable with this. There were people on screen there. If any, very, 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 very few people that were okay with what was happening or endorsing it. A lot of times it was the kid doesn't know what they're doing or why it gets provocative or why it gets the attention that it gets.
Right.
But there's definitely a lot of people on screen that you can see visibly uncomfortable, knowing that something isn't right in the situation. So it doesn't condone it in any way, shape, or form. It's like, here are these kids that are doing, you know, these are things that they see and they mirror, they emulate. They don't know exactly why people are attracted to those things in adults, but it's like, well, it must be this, right? So we'll just do the same thing. I don't even know why this is a thing, but I'm going to just do it. And
right.
then and people, and there are a bunch of people on screen that are just not comfortable with it. And that you mirror that as a viewer going, yeah, this isn't right.
This isn't right.
And it makes, you know, it can make you think about, well, what do I consume on a daily basis? That leads to those sort of influences, right? What you spend your time on is what you're endorsing. And so what am I endorsing, you know, passively or actively that contributes to a society that, you know, monetizes and endorses and promotes this type of feelings, and where it's not, you know, it's not in always the best context, right? It's not where the context where a kid can understand why that's not good for them in that moment.
In hearing you talk about that, oh man, hold on. I'm speaking English today. Today's my day off, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, I gotta ask. When you watched it, were you dub or subs?
Oh, when I first, well, I knew it was a French film, so I was expecting it to immediately be in French. And so then I heard like the English dub over it, and I was like, "Oh, this is weird." It's already going to be an uncomfortable movie, and so it was just already more uncomfortable hearing it in English.
I checked immediately. I'm like, I want to make sure that I have myself.
Yeah, I was like, it's got to be in French with English subtitles, because otherwise, I don't know, it loses kind of the authenticity of it.
Yeah,
you know.
I'm just interested. There's always a running debate for people, and for me, I'm in live action. I'm definitely subs. In animated stuff, like I'll do those because it's like
it's no big deal.
I'll support voiceover actors anyway. So there you go.
Yeah, 100%. So for those of you who are not super inclined to watch this movie, it's very different from like a story perspective, but from a plot line perspective, Into the Woods, Stephen Sondheim musical masterpiece, is pretty much the exact same story. Everything's, you know, hunky-dory in the first half until the person gets their like happy ever after. So in this case, Amy finds a group of friends, you know, she's starting to realize as an 11-year-old, you know, she's starting to kind of come to grips with who she is as a person. And then all of a sudden everything goes to hell when you realize what happy ever after means and the consequences of that. So if you don't want to watch Cuties, which you should do anyway, just go watch Into the Woods, enjoy the music, and listen for the actual story, which the moral of that story is, as Bernadette Peters says so eloquently at the very end, children will listen. So be careful of the things you say, because they're going to listen to what you're saying. So, and guide them. And that's overall kind of like the message of Cuties, is that like you have to be aware of the things that you're saying to, whether it's your kids or other people's children, because like they're listening and, are very easily influenced by everything that's going on in their world. Oh God, this movie is so freaking
100%. I think it also touches on the idea that it's not, you can't really shield the kids from this, right? You can put on as many safe filters and all those safe search things as you want, but honestly, like the algorithms are smarter than me, right? So if you trip on something, you can go down a deep hole and deep dive into that stuff, and it's just as easy to find that type of provocative stuff as a kid as it is to find a way to get radicalized online. So those things are there. Those things are there, and they're not going away. So what you have to do is understand that as a person in charge of a developing human life, you can't just try and protect them from it. You have to give them context. You have to give them the critical thinking skill set to make decisions that are value-based and things like that, where they can go, okay, am I going to make a decision to do something that I don't really agree with, but I'm too afraid to stand up? Or am I going to take the tougher road and have integrity, right? And those are things that parents, or not even parents, just the adults in charge, wherever they may be, the adults in charge need to have that. And that's something that really strikes you pretty quickly when you see, these kids, most of them don't have adults in charge a lot in their lives. And so when that happens, that's where they're going to go. And that's what's out there in the world. And it's just something you can't shield people from, right? You can't just lock them in a closet. They're going to find ways of, it's everywhere. And so it's, instead of trying to, it's like teaching abstinence only. It doesn't actually make people teenagers have less sex. It's like been studied.
Right.
Abstinence only doesn't actually have people have less sex. If you teach them safe sex, then they are going to make better decisions about their sexual encounters. But just saying, just say no. That totally worked for the war on drugs, right? Of course not.
Right.
So
here we are in 2020.
Yes. Hashtag not sponsored. Hashtag legalize it.
Legalize it.
Yes, please. So it speaks to the kids, but also speaks to the adults, because you can see that there isn't a scene where they listen to the kids at all, right? I think the great aunt asks like, "Oh, why did you do that? Why are you dressed that way?" And then doesn't listen to anything. She doesn't even let her talk. It's just
like berate.
Right. You're a child. You don't know any better. It's like, these are developing people, and they're going to have viewpoints, whether they're right or wrong or misguided or misinformed. You let that kid talk, like, you're going to create a better bond with that child. So then you can have that critical decision-making conversation with them about it. But this is all coming from someone who hasn't raised a small child ever.
Yeah,
and,
it's like, same. Like, these are all largely uninformed opinions on my end, because I do not have children that I've raised. But I think the thing that bothers me the most is that a lot of the comments are coming from people who forget that they were kids too. And like, also, though the circumstances might have been like vastly different, and that's totally fine. Like, we all had some sort of like coming of age moment in some way, shape, or form, like, I'm sure somebody out there has had to explain to their parent, like, what were all of those, searches on the internet browser. It's like, we can't as adults just sit back and act like what has happened, like what Amy is experiencing in this movie, we didn't also experience in some way, shape, or form ourselves. I think that's the other thing that bothers me the most, is that like people are so blind to the fact that they too were once 11 years old and awkward and uncomfortable and trying to like find themselves in that weird space of like pubescence.
Sure.
Which is a very messy, ugly time.
I mean, you take a look at things like Mean Girls, right? Mean Girls is someone trying to fit in, someone trying to find their way, trying to find a group. Like there are so many incredible parallels to that just off the cuff. It's just this movie's not a comedy, and so it'll take a little deeper tone to it, but it's still touching on a lot of the same issues that's a universal thing. We all had those things. I did a ton of things, in junior high and high school that like tried to conform or tried to fit in better than who I actually was. And I had to have a lot of those moments where it's like, okay, well, do you decide to go out on your own and say, this is who I am, this is what I believe in? I don't like that. I'd rather be ostracized from this group because it's better to live a certain way that, I'd be proud of or I'd make my family proud of than just be able to fit in. And you have to have those moments. And for me, I was lucky enough to have adults in charge in my life where I could have those conversations, or I could at least get that perspective, right? And if you don't have that, it's so much more difficult. I don't think if I was in any of those girls' situations that I'd be any better, if not worse than any of their behavior. Like, I was so many times just super close to getting, suspended, expelled for, being acting out and things like that. So it's if you don't have those things in there, if you don't have those influences, if you don't have those adults in charge, then it's going to be pretty difficult for you not to take what you see in the world and make what you can of your 11 years on it.
Mm-hmm. And I think with that idea in mind, like it's also very frustrating that the conversation has, like, with this movie has turned to like the save our children, which I'm here for. This is, I am totally agreeing with the idea of like hashtag save our children. I'm not entirely sure where the whole movement started. I've got to do a little bit more research on that one. Sometimes I think it comes off as a little bit of like a distraction piece, depending on when it's utilized.
Yeah.
But, like this is one of those opportunities where like this is something to like teach us all as people, like how to literally save our children. Like she said, here's this movie of how to save our children, teach them the right way. And everybody was like, no, I hate it. So we end up kind of in this terrible cycle of like kids making bad decisions, not learning from them because we as adults are too afraid to have those important conversations. And I say this more as like Americans, like the lovely Puritan society that we live in. But like we are woefully afraid to have these conversations. And it's bad news bears.
Yes. And it's only about certain subjects. Like we're 100% fine having conversations all day long about violence and guns. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that all day. America, we love our violence, we love our guns, never going to live. But you throw sex in there and all of a sudden it's very, very different, right? Oof. You can, we can have underage kids running around with guns shooting people. And we don't, all go, we should have a national conversation about that. But all of a sudden, as soon as it turns to sex, it's like, well, we can't
talk about
that. That's something we don't, we'll demonize it, even though everyone consumes it and everyone endorses it. But it's the people that are like, well, anti-sex work, it's such an interesting American dichotomy when you have people that are okay with images of, kids taking other kids' lives, right? Like, right. We'll watch all the Hunger Games where you have little kids killing other kids. Like, that's a thing.
Hello. Hello. Hunger Games, Divergent, you name the young adult series.
Yeah. Harry Potter, kids smashed each other with spells.
Oh,
that's God. Totally fine.
Yeah.
You just have fights on, well, we won't get into Harry Potter. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, we here at Next to the Floor, that is myself and Gary, though, as a child who, found solace in Harry Potter, woefully disappointed in J.K. Rowling and anything and everything to do with her. Ugh, it just makes me so mad. And so, sidebar, I'm just very upset with, her trajectory as human. because of the new. This is my inner gamer geek coming out. The new open world Harry Potter game that's coming out. I'm so mad.
How can I endorse this now?
Yeah, right. So, but yeah,
I hear as someone who's got a couple more trips around the world. I'd liken it to Star Wars for me, right? It was something that we had the VHSs and we burnt those things to the ground as we watched them so many times. And then, the next trilogy and the next trilogy, and you just start to go, oof, it's not going in great places. It's got pretty bad themes. Oh, yeah, the hero falls in love with the guy that commits genocide. That's fine. Again, we're totally fine with the violence.
Yeah.
All right. We'll out-violence anybody. That's our America's job. But yeah, it's
good.
It's the idea that not addressing something will make it go away, right? I think, it's... To bring it back to something, race and dance, at least race, there's a clip of like Morgan Freeman. Everyone loves Morgan Freeman. He's the voice
everybody loves using this friggin' clip. I know exactly.
Yeah, the clip of him going like, "How do you get rid of racism? Just stop talking about it. Just don't talk about it. You're a man. I'm a man. Let's just not talk about racism. There won't be any more racism." I'm like, yeah, he's great as the voice of God. He was fantastic. I loved him in Robin Hood, right? That's not something he gets a lot of credit for, but I thought it was fun in Robin Hood. But like, let's not pretend that he's like the authority on it. And then all of a sudden, like not saying, like, if I'm just a man and you're just a man, it's like, that's just one step away from, I don't see color, which is so patronizing.
Right.
So it's like, don't deny what I am. Like, that's the first thing you see. It's been studied that like children, what's one of the first things you notice immediately, children even notices the skin color, and the traits associated with it happen so very quickly. Mm-hmm. It gets ingrained in children while we're talking about kids. And so let's not pretend that not saying anything will suddenly make all the problems go away. We as a culture, a society in America, a Western culture, but probably pervasive throughout the world, we need to address issues head on as opposed to just going, well, if we don't talk about it, it'll just kind of go away, right? If we don't talk about white supremacy, it'll just kind of go away, right? We'll wait for the old racists to die off, right? My mom was younger than I was when people were saying that, and it's been generations. The racists don't die off; they just have more racists,
right?
And they're the ones talking about. They'll talk about till the cows come home, and so their kids and their kids and their kids will all have that ingrained in them. And if we're on the other side, going, well, if we just don't talk about race, I don't see you as a race, right? It's like, well, the world does.
The world
right?
does.
If I snatched your purse, you'd see me as a race all of a sudden. So let's not pretend that I'm not. Embrace it. Celebrate it. That's totally fine. I love it. But don't deny that it exists and expect things to change. Right? It's the laundry situation, right? The laundry in its basket won't put itself away if it just sits there in the basket.
It's okay. All right. As I look around at the piles, it's all folded. It is all folded.
There you go.
Around me at the moment. It will get put away today, I promise. Mom, if you're watching, I am doing my laundry. But no, like what you just said there, let's just wait until all of the old races die off. And then you have, the likes of one Kyle Rittenhouse or Dylan Roof or, name the list, right? Mm-hmm. Of all of these young radicalized white boys who are, just like their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents before them. So like how long did that if we're going to find a centralized point, it's like, how long do you wait?
You can't wait.
And how long do you avoid it? Like the time to talk about it was yesterday.
Yeah.
The time to talk about it was yesterday.
Yeah. When I have a conversation with my family and, when they lived in, they still live in, the outside of Chicago, but living through the Chicago race riots, like they tell me, like, I was hoping you would never have to see stuff like that. I was hoping that you would never have to experience the things that I did. And yeah, I have been. And people younger than me, the people I see, the people I take care of at the studio, they go through these things. Mm-hmm. They get subjected to that. And it won't go away by not doing anything, right? It's a cancer. It is a cancer. You can't just sit and hope that you outlive cancer without treating it. You have to take treatments. You have to get surgery. You have to actively fight against this cancer. And nothing's going to change if we just sit there and deny to begin the uncomfortable conversation of to talk about, a lot of people's implicit unconscious endorsement or role in white supremacy, patriarchy, like any of those aspects, what you have done, what you have not done. You can be a decent human being and then realize a lot of the things you've done in your life has contributed to it in one way or another. I know that, there's a lot of things that in my youth that I have done that weren't, female centric. They weren't things that supported women. That weren't things that, I wasn't necessarily, it doesn't matter. I wasn't necessarily a great human being overall. I did a lot of learning to do. But, it wasn't things that where I centered Black women's voices or women's voices. It was just like I existed. I thought everybody was fine and fair, and that was my naivete. But, yeah, you have to support marginalized peoples, right? And so by doing that, it's an active decision you have to make. And you have to make that decision all the time until it becomes second nature. And that takes a very long time. It doesn't take the 6 weeks it took you to read White Fragility for it to change.
Like a huge eye roll there for that book, White Fragility. It's really funny. I'm going to change the subject again. Speaking of that book, a friend of mine posted about that book and how he thought it was a really good read or whatever, and has been really helpful for him to, examine his own biases and things along those lines, and do a lot of introspection and realization for him as far as his role in the greater workings of white supremacy or whatever. But he made a post about it, and he signed off that it was incredibly digestible at 180 pages. And I took a lot of umbrage with that because it shouldn't be it shouldn't be easily digestible. That phrase, it shouldn't be easily digestible at 180 pages because it's a lifelong process. What you were saying, was I a great human being early on? Probably, was I a great human being early on? No, not at all. But that's what life is about, is working to become the best human being that you possibly can. And to think that, a 180-page book written by a white person on, examining your own subconscious biases, when there are so many other great books written by Black people, in particular Black women. I've got an entire list of books written by Black women that are infinitely better and will help you do so much more examining than White Fragility. But that's another topic for another day. I just have to say that about White Fragility.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad. You're not a bad person if you read it, or if you're not well, you're a terrible person if that was the thing you read. I think that is, you're right. It's 100% digestible. It's centered around making sure white people feel okay with their guilt or whatever, their fragility, right? But it's not, it's okay. Well, if people want to change how they live, it's not always the comfortable things that actually make the difference. The comfortable things might get you in the door. It might get you started so you don't get disincentivized to do it at all. Sure. But what actions did you take afterwards? What voices, what voices did you amplify? What people did you promote? What things are you deciding to make different in your life, as opposed to wow, you guys Black people weren't lying the past 400 years when they said police did this, or they weren't lying, when college entry exams were like this, and they weren't lying with standardized tests, and they weren't lying. If that's all we got, it's oh, it exists. It's great. Now get started. That's not the end. It's not where you need to finish. That's where you need to start.
That's where you need to start. And there's so much more legwork that needs to be done. And that is the biggest point there. That should not be the end all be all. Once you read White Fragility, you're done. You are not done with the work. There's so much more that needs to be done. And I think that's the thing that gets so exhausting, in particular as, a person of color is seeing, so many well-meaning white friends, colleagues, or whatever who, at this, when George Floyd died 7,000 billion years ago at the beginning of 2020. Oh, man. Two completely separate issues, George Floyd dying and also 2020 being 7 billion years long. But, how everybody was so ardently looking for ways to examine their own role within the structure and system of white supremacy within the United States. And then it very quickly died off, as it so often does. And so I often kind of wonder, where are those same voices now? And what are the continued action steps that people are taking to make sure that they are, continuing to examine their roles within white supremacy, or are things just kind of going to go back to the way that they were before?
I think, well, there's a couple different things that you made me think of right there. First, people should be allowed to be fallible.
Yeah.
Let's talk so I read a couple articles recently, there's a lot of things going out about Ruth Bader Ginsburg right now after she passed. And, she had a poor take on Kaepernick when it first started, right? Mm-hmm. She just had a bad take on it, right? She admitted she was wrong, right? She's like, she admitted she didn't walk it back. She admitted like she was not in the right position on it. Right. And, people should be allowed to do that. You can't be like, well, she had a bad take and now let's burn her at the cross, whatever. So you should be allowed to have that. If making dumb mistakes as a younger person doesn't negate good things that you have done, just as good things that you have done doesn't negate atrocities that you commit against other people as well. So there's always going to be balance and nuance that needs to be had. And what is the person continually doing? And intentions matter, right? If you're doing it to clean up stuff, then that's one thing. If you're doing it because, and this actually brings it to my second point, which you were talking about, the fatigue people have, like, wow, it's really, it's always there and it's going to happen. There's so many pieces of structures of power in place that keep white supremacy up. It's just exhausting. It's like, yeah. And doing the work, you're not going to get likes. You're not going to get paid for it. You do the work because you want to be a better human being. You want to treat other human beings with equity. That's the only thing you get. You're not going to get special prizes. No one's going to give you a medal that you're like, there is no like jacket that you get to wear once you become an ally, right? There's no like starter jacket, varsity jacket. They're like, oh, I earned my allyship, like, right? Like
everybody gets a FUBU switcher.
I did it. Oh my God. I'm just thinking of those big shiny like Missy Elliott Timberland style. Just like, oh my God.
Once you become, once you do, this is for everyone out there. Once you do all of my allies, once you do 10,000 hours of allyship, you get a Missy Elliott shiny swisher suit. Oh my God. That's awesome. I'm gonna tweet her that exact idea to see what she says.
I'd be down. I'm like, how do I log my hours of existence?
Right. How do I log that?
No, but it's the work you have to do as a human being because you want to be a better person. You want to be a person that when you look back at your life, you want to be a person that looks back and goes, yeah, I did things that were that held my views with integrity. I was a person built on morals. I had a conversation with one of the staff members a couple days ago about why some things in security and government are so messed up, and why people feel like their privacy is now just out for sale from so many giant companies. And a lot of times we have this tiered system where, and I'm stealing this from a conversation I heard that everything should be based, on, we should have the bottom layer be morals, right? Morally, this is where I stand. That dictates ethics, how I act in business and in social situations. And then on top of that is the laws as a society, the social contract that we have together. And a lot of times it's flipped, right? That the laws dictate our ethics and our morals, because it's like, well, I can get away with it because it's not technically against the law, or I can work around it. So then it's not bad. So morally, I don't feel bad about it, even though it's a terrible thing morally to do. And so we have to have those conversations with ourselves going like, do I want to do the hard work of being a better person to the people around me? Like, yeah, that's a decision you have to make. And you have to live with the consequences if people don't give you any credit for it. Like, I know in my past, I have not been always, I was a dumb kid. I've not been great to the LGBTQIA plus the pride community, right? I wasn't always a fervent supporter. It was more of just like, it's not my deal because I'm not part of the community. And so I saw things and saw how people acted that weren't great. And I didn't stand up enough for it. And that's something that partially drives me to always stand up for people in marginalized communities, because I know in my past, I haven't always been the person I envisioned myself to be. I have to match my actions with the persona I have in my head, right? That's how I view it. You have this like character in your head of who Drew really is. And then every day you have to wake up and make the decisions to, am I that person? Right? Person? How that person would act, and that's how I would act. And then you start to create who you are based on that. And if you make more decisions toward one side or another, that's what dictates who you are, rather than, no, I'm a good person. Why? Because I've decided I'm a good person. Back it up. Because I am a good person. Because I think I am, right?
And that just for everyone who's watching at home, you can do that without feeling guilty about the things that you've done in the past.
Yes.
I think that's the big thing. And like the largest issue facing, this conversation about race and racism is that idea of white guilt, which is ever so pervasive. And, it's okay to feel bad about the things that you've done in your role and stuff, but like, no one's asking you to dwell on it.
And no one's asking you to like publicly, flagellate yourself. Like no one's asking you to be like, please forgive me of all my transgressions, Black people. Like I literally saw a video of like people like praying for forgiveness to Black people. Like it's like no one's really asking for that. Don't do that. Say
you're sorry and move on. Just like say you're sorry and like be a better person.
Be a better person. Be a better person. I know you've made mistakes. Everyone has. Nobody's perfect. That is part of it. And there are some mistakes that have much bigger gravity than others. Absolutely. But like go out and try and do better. Like, and that's what people want to see. Just the more days that you do better than the days that you fall down, like just keep one-upping that side of it. And that's what people are looking for. And that's what people are asking. That's
literally all Black people are asking for right now is just like, say sorry and like be better.
Yeah.
And also arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. So
you saw that. Okay, so political politics, but like, so Trump put out that like list of Supreme Court appointees that he had thinking of a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
And the AG, Daniel Cameron, was on it.
Yep.
Yeah, and like the guy who didn't arrest anybody, and while there were protests, he had his like wedding shower during the protests. Like it's just terrible bad take. And of course they're like, well, yeah, he's a Black guy, so we can avoid the Supreme Court and it'll be terrible. Yeah.
That goes just to repeat a phrase that I think everybody loves is that skin folk ain't always kinfolk.
Kinfolk.
So unfortunately, y'all, we are at the end of our episode for today. Drew.
Yes.
You have been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining.
I very much enjoyed myself. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for geeking out over an incredible movie with me and, talking art and stuff about it.
Yeah, no, I had a blast. Thinking back of what I was talking about, I know it can sound like a downer sometimes on the world, but I actually am a pretty upbeat and positive person about what, I'm glad that people are making movies like Cuties so that people can have conversations and start to look more actively at their lives, the things they consume, what they endorse passively and actively. Like, I think, again, the world's moving in a better place. It's moving in a great direction. Mm-hmm. It's slow and it trips up all the time and it is painful, but we are going towards the right direction as a society and as a planet, even if it is on fire and, falling apart.
Yep.
It is still, I am still hopeful. Every day I wake up and, I've decided that it's going to be a great day because I'm alive and I'm not going to be fatalistic about it. And, I think that's a great thing. And I'm really glad that I was able to, be a part of this and have people, enjoy it if they did.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for joining. To everyone at home, thank you so much for listening in. This has been Next to the Floor. We will be back in 2 weeks, October. Already, holy crap. Make sure you remember we're doing a giveaway from London Customs Designs. Make sure you like the video and, subscribe. Leave a comment below. One lucky viewer is going to win some merchandise from London Customs at onelondoncustoms.com. And with that, make sure you go watch the movie Cuties on Netflix. It's nuanced. It's incredible. Highly, highly recommend. 10 out of 10. And, with that, I've been Harrison, and we'll catch you next time we're on the floor. Have a wonderful rest of